Now, we've got an extra guest for you today in Perspective, a guest who is a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. This was back in 2018. Nadia Murad was born and raised a Yazidi in the small village in the north of Iraq. Now, when she was just 21, Islamic State group terrorists attacked her community. This was back in 2014, killing hundreds of people, including her mother and 6 of her 9 brothers. Now, she, along with approaching 7,000 other women and children, were abducted, many raped, beaten and tortured for several months. Now, her story is documented in her book, The Last Girl, My Story of Captivity and My Fight Against the Islamic State. Nadia Murad has been in Paris for a series of events at Sciences Po University and others as well. She joins us here on set. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us on the programme. Tell us then, first of all, what happened to you back in 2014. Let's bear in mind you were just 21 at the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And you know, it was 11 years ago, and I cannot believe that I'm still talking about that experience, because 11 years ago, I thought that if I survive ISIS captivity, I will never look back at what happened to me. But it was important to use my voice and my story to raise awareness of conflict-related sexual violence and to tell the world the stories of other women and children and my friends, my nieces, my sisters, my cousins who were still in captivity in Iraq and Syria. And it was important to write the book to document what ISIS did against Yazidis, especially women and children and other minorities. So the book, it's really not just my story, but the story of my family, my community, and what, you know, how sexual violence has been used as a weapon of war to destroy communities like mine.
I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, for journalists to be able to get access to these kind of stories when they're happening. So we have to rely on people like you to come forward and tell those stories. I mean, tell us how bad it was, some of the terrible things that happened.
And I think that is really important for us, for survivors like me, whether from Iraq or other parts of the world, to be able to have the platform to use their voices and story to help others. It's important to hear from survivors like me directly about, you know, how these crimes happen and how we can prevent them. And even though for 11 years ago it was horrible for me and many of my friends, but it continues to happen as we have more than 2,500 women and children still missing in ISIS captivity, including my sister-in-law, my niece, my nephew, my cousins. And ISIS was public and proud of what they did to Yazidi women. They established slave markets, buying and selling women throughout the Iraq, where they were in control, and Syria. And for them, women and children were a huge part for the war. They were, after that, a lot of them sold Yazidis to their families, asking for a lot of money that many families couldn't even afford. And unfortunately, despite all the evidence and testimonies, the international community has done very little to hold ISIS members accountable. We have seen only a few cases of ISIS members being held accountable, despite all the evidence.
And after you were held by ISIS, you did manage to escape, didn't you? Tell us how that happened.
Yes, I was one of the many lucky girls who was able at the very beginning to escape with the support of a Muslim family from Mosul, and I was able to reach my brother in Kurdistan region. But as you know, my new world was a displacement camp after surviving ISIS captivity. And my home was under ISIS control. And in the camps, it was hard, because for many survivors, it was difficult to share their stories of rape publicly, as there is so much social shame and stigma often associated with rape. And a lot of survivors try to hide from the media, from aid workers, from neighbors, because it was dangerous to talk about rape. But I was able to share my story with anyone who was eager to listen. And I continue to do the work even after I moved to Germany, and it has become my mission to use my voice to help others and to make sure that what happened to me 11 years ago will never happen again to anybody else.
I mean, what happened to you? I mean, it could have, knowing your story, I mean, it could have destroyed you, couldn't it? It could have, emotionally wrecked you.
It did at some point.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did. But since then, you've really been able to fight back, if you like. I mean, you must be an incredibly strong person to be able to do that.
It takes a lot of courage to do this work and share a story like mine, but it's very sad because I have been sharing this story and I see that conflict-related sexual violence continues to take place right now in Sudan, in Ukraine, where I was a few years ago, in Congo, where I talked to some friends last week. It continues to happen, and we are failing over and over again to prevent this from happening. But it's hard, even though I don't share a lot of details from my experience and what happened to me, because I wrote a book, and for me, in order to do this work, I need to also prioritize my well-being. But it's still hard, and a lot is happening in the world, and sometimes these topics get sidelined by the media and the international community. So it's important to continue the work and raise awareness and remind the world leaders of their responsibility to prevent this from happening.
What kind of things have you been able to do? And I mentioned you're at Sciences Po at the moment. Obviously, you're regularly doing interviews as well to kind of raise awareness as well.
Well, the most important thing for me was not choosing silence. Even though a lot of people told me that, after I moved to Germany, I should focus on myself, and that now I was very far from the crimes that were committed against me, but I continue to use my voice. One of the most important thing in my work is advocating for justice and accountability. We advocated with my lawyer Amal Clooney to establish a UN team. It's called UNITA, that investigated in ISIS crimes. We have been able to, through that team, a lot of families were able, including my family, to bury some of their loved ones who were murdered in 2014. We also work on with families at my initiative on the team on the ground in Iraq. They are in contact with families, and every once in a while we bring some survivors from captivity from Syria, working with the President Nadir Barzani, but we need more support because we're talking about thousands of children who were taken when they were kids, and now they're teenagers. They've been brainwashed, and it's important that we get support from our own government and the international community. We also focus a lot on making sure that vulnerable population can return back to their homeland and we can restore their faith and dignity. As you know, the number of displaced people is growing every year. It has, more than 100 million people are displaced worldwide. And a lot of them don't have the opportunity, as I had, to come to Germany or France or anywhere. So we need to focus more on a sustainable solution on how we can empower people to go back, not only survive in these camps, but to make sure they go home and thrive when it's possible.
Why do you think the international community does so little? I mean, earlier on, you appealed to the international community to do a lot more. Is it simply a case of there are so many problems around the world that trying to fix all of them is impossible? Or do you think it's just a case that, people think that they can just ignore it because it's not happening in their country?
Well, it's a combination of many things. Of course, a lot is happening in the world. But, for example, when it comes to justice and accountability for survivors of ISIS, we have a lot of evidence that were collected, testimonies by a UN team that was supported by the international community. But, years later, there is a lack of political will and funding and expertise for this group and for many families who have suffered in the past almost 11 years and not found closure. And the lack of justice is just devastating for many survivors. Justice has been delayed over and over again. And it's a question that I have not received an answer. When I asked them why we, despite all the evidence, we have seen only a few ISIS members held accountable, but also it's their citizens, not only the problem of Iraq or people who joined ISIS in Iraq. There are a lot of thousands of people who joined ISIS from all around the world in Syria and Iraq, committed crimes of violence and sexual violence and war crimes. And their countries are refusing to bring them back and hold them accountable. But we continue to fight because it's only through justice that we can make sure that people can live together in peace again, especially in a place like the Middle East.
Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2018. I get the impression, talking to you, that this is your life now. You're going to carry on fighting for people. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't, I grew up in a small remote village. I never wanted to be an activist. All I wanted, I wanted to be a makeup artist. I wanted to open a beauty salon, but it happened to me and my family and my community. And now it has become my mission and my life. And I have met survivors from all around the world. They trust me with their stories, and it's important for me to share their stories with the world. But I also feel like, my survival carried with it a responsibility to do this work, to share the stories of my nieces, my cousins, my neighbors who didn't survive. And it's important for the world to know that those were not just numbers, but human beings that were loved and supported. And it has become my life.
Good to hear from you. Thank you very much for coming in and talking to us on the programme today. Nadia Murad, as I said, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2018, and you saw her book there called The Last Girl, My Story of Captivity and My Fight Against the Islamic State. Thanks very much once again for coming in and talking to us here on France 24.
Thank you.